Hello, everybody. This is Doug Massey, president of AFGE Local 17. We're back doing another podcast. For this podcast, we've first of all, we've done a lot of legal podcasts. We've had discussions about probationary status, discussions about RIFs, reasonable accommodations. This one's going to be a little different. Today, we have Wright, who is a social worker in the Washington, D.C. area. He's going to be talking about mental health issues these days, especially with federal employees. And we decided to do this because very recently I was at my son's school picking him up. I was talking to one of the dads there I know, and he was telling me how his wife, who was an attorney at the Department of Justice, kind of high level, was having heart palpitations. And she went to her cardiologist. And after explaining her symptoms, he looked at her and said, "Are you a federal employee?" And she says, "Yes. How did you know?" He said, "Because business is booming with federal employees." So we're not going to have a cardiologist here today, but I realized that, and I've been getting a lot of calls, text messages, emails from people who are having a very difficult time. And it's understandable because look at what's being thrown at us. We have return to office. We have RIFs, reduction in force, possible termination. We're being constantly bombarded with insults that we're the swamp, we're the deep state, we're the radical left. And, really, we're just people trying to do a job. We're trying to, a fair day's work for a fair day's pay. And, I have never experienced this. I've been with the federal government for 28 years. And this is the first. And even our own secretary, he gets on a video and saying that the VA is not a place to employ people. Well, how does that come across if you're a high performer? If you're, contributing to the mission of the VA? It's not a very good look. So anyways, without further ado, let me bring in Wright Doss. Hi, Wright. It's good to have you here with Local 17. Anyways, I was just explaining that you're a licensed clinical social worker in the DC area, and you do treat quite a few federal employees and who have a lot going on, obviously, with what's going on with the federal government. So the floor is yours.
Okay. Thanks so much, Doug, for that kind introduction. And, it is such a difficult time for our federal government employees. And, I see enough of it in the news, but I hear about it so often from so many of my clients, and my colleagues are echoing this, that there's such an increase in demand for mental health services by federal government employees because, the environment that you guys are working in is really terrible, frankly. And, without getting into the politics of it, anytime you work in an environment where your work and your character is constantly demeaned, right? That's an attack, and when we feel attacked, right, we get stressed, we get anxious. It's a very normal response to being in, a very hostile environment. And, it's times like this where we really need to focus in on several items that I want to talk with you guys about. Well, the first and probably the most important is self-care. We talk about, the basic needs of human beings, right? Food, shelter, clothing. And when we get anxious and fearful, I hear people say, I'll ask them, "Did you eat food today?" And they'll say, "Well, actually, I really haven't eaten anything in 2 days." "Have you been drinking water?" A little bit.
Right? Oh, that would not be my problem. Yeah, that would definitely not be my problem.
I'm glad to hear that, Doug, because, our physical health is tied to our emotional well-being. That we know for sure. And it's really important that we take care of ourselves and remain as healthy as we can, that we look after our own physical health. And the very basics of that are making sure that we are eating 3 square meals, as balanced a meal as we can get. We don't have to be perfect, but making sure that we're eating enough and getting enough fluids. And it's amazing how just that can sort of help our stress levels. And the other part of self-care is really planning and committing to activities that you enjoy, and
Mhm.
particularly activities that involve other people. The more time that
Mhm.
we spend in the physical presence of other people, anxiety and stress levels come down. There are studies that show that stress hormones decrease the more time that we spend with other people in our physical proximity. When we're holed up alone, right, for hours and hours and hours every day or at night,
Mhm.
it gives our brain full rein to increase our stress level. So it's important to commit to these activities. And another part of self care is really investing ourselves into our community. And one of the greatest things I think about the labor movement in the United States is that it provides a sense of community. I have a client actually that I saw this week who grew up in a family. His father was the president of his local union. And he said, he was in the union too at 8 years old because he helped his dad every single weekend in every union activity. And there's really a community within the union. And I really encourage people to make use of that community as a support. You guys work together, you understand what each other's going through, and that's an important part of gaining good emotional support, is really being able to lean into the people around you. And sometimes those people that around us, we may not agree with them on everything, but we need to be able to find that common ground with people and
Mhm.
rely on them and let them rely on us. It's part of how we get through periods like this together.
Well, I remember, whether I'm working at home or whether I'm in the office, I can be very absorbed in what I'm doing. And you're right. I found that, like, if at work, if I go to the cafeteria and see people, or if I'm at home, I go to a coffee shop, and it's just, it kind of takes a break, because really, working and just being by yourself, you can kind of go stir crazy.
Absolutely, Doug. Absolutely. And stress and anxiety is really a very physical response. That feeling of being stressed. You mentioned the anecdote with the person who went to the cardiologist, and
Mhm.
that's a very real phenomenon. People are getting pains in their chest, and you want to be able to attend to those. You shouldn't assume that it's just stress, but know that that is a very common experience. And stress and anxiety, really, first and foremost, is a physiological response to our environment. When we feel attacked, our
Mhm.
body goes into fight flight response. And our heart rate goes up, our blood pressure goes up, our blood vessels constrict, our brain puts stress hormones and adrenaline into our system, and we are ready to fight or flight. And we don't want to fight in this situation, right, physically, but
Mhm.
that's what our body is sort of preparing us for, because we feel attacked. And federal employees are having to go through this, right? And the narratives that are coming out in social media, in the news, are so unfair. The work that all our federal government workers, and I know some
Mhm.
of what you guys do in the VA, and how critical it is, the services that you provide for those people who put their lives on the line for this country over the last 25 years in particular. You guys do such an incredible service, and you deserve to be congratulated for that. You deserve to be thanked for that, not put down for that. And so it's natural to have this fight flight response, and we need to manage that response, right, through relaxation, exercise, good eating, decrease our caffeine, be aware of our alcohol intake.
Wait a minute, caffeine, we got to decrease that. Yeah, I don't
You
know
know,
about
I will tell you, you don't have to get rid of it, but
that.
if you
Mhm.
find yourself drinking a 32 ounce of Starbucks at 4 o'clock in the afternoon,
Okay, that's ridiculous. Yeah, because okay, you know what I've noticed is like drinks, coffee, soda. It's gotten larger and larger
Yeah,
over the years, and coffee used to be like 6 ounces, and now it's like I'll have one coffee. It's like that's like 5 coffees,
it
or
is.
the big
And
gulp. You know.
if you find yourself your heart racing through the day and you're somebody who drinks 3 cups of coffee, try to cut back to one in the morning and see how that helps. If you're having problems sleeping at night, caffeine, even the caffeine that we have at around noon,
Mhm.
can sometimes be bouncing around our head at midnight. And if we're particularly sensitive to that, and we're going through a really stressful time, cutting back on caffeine can be helpful. You know,
What about I was talking to somebody recently, and when I was a kid, the 6 o'clock news would come on. It would go from 6 to 6:30. It would be
mhm.
Walter Cronkite, and that would be it. And now it's like a nonstop, with social media, and it's like it's never ending.
Thank
And
you.
do you think that
Yeah.
has an impact on? It's definitely had an impact on me. I know that.
It has an enormous impact on our mental health right now, Doug. And I'm so glad that you brought that up because, it's so important that we curate our exposure to the news, and particularly in social media where we're not really seeing the news. We're seeing, what somebody wants us to see. And, they may be somebody we agree with, but that doesn't mean that they're showing us the truth. And it may be something that we disagree with, and they may not be showing us the truth. And I will tell you what I share with my clients is that the news cycle, and there's a lot of people in this world who this will not be a popular opinion with, but the truth is the news cycle, which is constant, is designed to evoke an emotional response in us. That's why we click.
Hmm.
Oh my God, click. Oh my God, click. Oh my God, click. And we're constantly going back and forth and back and forth, or I love this, or I hate this, right? And that constant barrage of information to our brain, we're really not capable of managing. Our brains are capable of managing the amount of information that human beings got 5,000 years ago. They're really not, we have not, our brains have not developed to 21st century technology. And we need to acknowledge that the more that we expose ourselves to social media and the news, the higher our stress levels will be. And every client that I've worked with who's begun to really curate, and I use that word deliberately because we need to prioritize what kinds of stories are important to us, because not everything that makes us angry in the news is something we have to devote time to. And I say that not because it's not important, but because you can't spend time being angry at everything there is to be angry about in the news when the news is designed to make you angry. And I say this to people on both sides of the aisle, that no matter what news you're reading, it's designed to evoke an emotional response. And if you want to decrease your emotional responses, look at the news from 6 to 6:30. And
Well, it wasn't that long ago where the events in the news didn't really impact people's thoughts, right? And I remember reading like the thoughts you have today, you'll have 95% of the same thoughts tomorrow and the next day. And, sometimes if you analyze your thinking, you're like, why am I thinking about the same stuff? And why am I thinking about this? This is a waste of, it's almost like a distraction, like noise that's constantly going instead of, oh, look at like today I was looking out the window, there were 8 deer out there. And I said, oh yeah, I have to answer these emails. And
mm,
sometimes I'll sit back, but it's very difficult, I think, in this environment, especially with cell phones and text messaging. It's like being bombarded constantly.
it's exactly right. And, that bombardment raises our stress levels, raises those hormones in our blood, um, elevates our heart rate. And it's really crucial that that we step back from that. And you mentioned, thinking about that same thing 24 hours later. Part of what stress does is that, it the fight flight response makes us makes us think about what is stressful over and over and over and over again, as if we were walking through the forest and came upon a poisonous snake. Until that snake is gone, we're going to
Mm.
continue to focus in on that snake or whatever we
Mm.
see as dangerous. The problem is, if what we see as dangerous is constantly coming up in our mind because we're looking at it in the news, we don't stop thinking about it. We can't stop thinking about it until we really remove ourselves from those stressful cues for a period of time. And that's not to say don't watch the news, because you got to stay informed right now. But how often does the news change from hour to hour?
I don't know. I mean, it's kind of sometimes it does. I mean, it seems like the last for me in my position, it seems like the last month has seemed like a couple of years with all the bombardment of information.
Yes.
Um, but I remember when I first started this union work, the prior president said, "I can't wait till I retire and there's no more email."
Mm,
And I always remember that because some days I have that thought, like it's just a bombardment. And the thing is that with federal employees, there's a real fear of, am I going to have my job tomorrow or next week? And people have mortgages, they have tuition. Even if you don't have that, everybody's got bills. And I was talking to somebody, and she's got a mortgage, a second mortgage, and a TSP loan,
mm,
and I think she's doesn't make a lot of money, and she's scared to death. Like, what happens when it's gone? But, the thing is there's the saying, you know, those people suffer more than when you suffer before. So when the
mm.
event happens, you know, you're going to be thinking about it. You're going to be wasting a lot of time. And intellectually, you may know that, but it's very difficult to really stop thinking about it.
It's hard, and it's so easy for me to talk about this, and it's so hard to implement. And what I would encourage people to do is to know that you're not supposed to be perfect at this. This is an imperfect world and
Mhm.
a very imperfect situation, and we're not supposed to handle it perfectly. But if we can handle it more effectively for our own sake, if we can remove 10 or 15% of our stress, something that we can notice, right? So that we're sleeping a little bit better, right? So that our appetite is back, so that we're not snapping at people, you know?
Oh yeah, yeah. There's been times I've just been a nightmare. I feel bad for my family sometimes. They're just like, what the hell's your problem? But
Like, oh, yeah. And yeah, what's your problem? And they are real problems, and I empathize so much that the people that I work with and the real things that they're facing right now. And sometimes as a therapist, I don't have like a nice fancy reframe for them. Oh, just think about it this way and everything will be fine. That's not that doesn't cut it right now. These fears are real, right? And we have to prioritize what's most important for our lives, and how can we also try to help somebody else around us.
that's the key. One of our stewards was talking about, she went down to Tennessee helping victims of the recent storm. They're still suffering. And she went down there for the weekend. And, what I said about you have the same thoughts every day. Well, if you're in a different environment helping people, you're going to have a whole different set of thoughts and a whole different set of perspectives. And she came back and just said it was a great experience. And I was thinking that would be nice to do something like that. Just get out of yourself and give back to people.
And get out of the physical environment that you're in and change things up. And you know part of what I mentioned earlier about the community that we all live in, right? Whether it's our work community, our home community, a larger community, the country, investing ourselves in the community. And when you see somebody who seems like they're struggling, step away from your moment of stress, right? And check in with them and say, how are you doing?
Yeah.
And that's invaluable to people. I had somebody do something for me recently in a doctor's office where I forgot to bring this piece of paper that I needed. And the nurse that was in the office said, you know what, go home and get the piece of paper. We'll squeeze you in, so that I wouldn't have to make another appointment to come back. And I looked at her and I wanted to cry, because she didn't have to do that. She could have just said, sir, you forgot the paper. You needed the paper. She was right. I did need the paper, but I didn't have the paper. But she just said, she looked at me and she did something nice for me. I don't know why, but that meant so much to me that day. It carried me through a couple of days of feeling good about the world and seeing that there's good things going on. Be that person for someone else in the world.
I think that's probably the best. That's the biggest reminder I need, really, because, I think for myself, I can get so wrapped up in my problems and my daily struggle trying to do my job. And you're right. If you get out and you try to do something nice for somebody, or, that one colleague who went and did something for a whole weekend, that totally takes you out of your problems. And I always think back to this. I remember this interview during the height of the Ukrainian war, and they were interviewing this guy. He's got like his M16, this Ukrainian guy, and they had the translator, and he's like, well, he basically said, I'm an accountant. He's like, well, when did you become a soldier? He's like, last week. He's like, when did you learn how to shoot that gun? He said, last week. And the guy's probably dead, right? He's probably not around. But I remember thinking, this guy, that country got devastated, and he's going to fight for his family. I think his wife and kids went to Poland. He stayed behind. And I'm like, man, this guy's got real problems, and not to belittle, the anxiety that people face.
Right.
But I wanted to ask you something like, what do you think it's helpful for people to have a plan B? Like, what if I lose my job? Should they be thinking about that, or is that going to add more anxiety or less?
No, I think it's important, that we feel like we have choices, and part of the stress response, right? The fight flight response, part of decreasing that is knowing that we have choices and realistic choices. I don't want anyone who works in the federal government to leave because of what is going on. Now, that's my selfish opinion, because I believe in what you guys are doing, right? And we need people to be doing what you're doing. And if you guys aren't there to do that, it doesn't get done. No pressure, but seriously, what you guys do is that important. And at the same time, it's helpful to know you have choices, and it's helpful to go out there and look, right? And find out, what are your choices?
Yeah.
Make the decision that's best for you and your family right now. And I hope that, people who need to find another option do. There are options. And I have another client that I've worked with who, had difficulty finding something, and they needed to look a little bit more aggressively and work with a recruiter, and they found some other things that they were really interested and passionate in. And I don't know if they'll end up going in that direction, but it was helpful to even see that there were options. When we know that there is an exit strategy, right? Going back to that notion of when you're walking through the forest and you see a poisonous snake, knowing that we can step back from that snake, and stepping back decreases our level of anxiety. If we feel trapped, like our back's against the wall, our stress level goes up exponentially.
Well, we did have that family conversation about what my plan B is if I get removed. And it's made me feel much better. The anxiety went down. So I'll share what I've got. My plan B is I was going to do like a GoFundMe and some scratch tickets. And so basically begging and gambling. Um, no,
Doug, whatever works for you.
yeah, you gotta have that back there. But it's interesting. Tom Brady, he in an interview he said he never had a plan B strategy. But F him. He's got 7 Super Bowl rings.
His
The
plan B was
supermodel
just
wife
a
that he
ring.
ditched. Yeah, we're not all Tom Brady's, but no,
That's right.
But these are real fears. But
Mhm.
I was thinking, what's the worst that could happen? If they fire me, okay, financial insecurity. I go get something else. Even drive Uber. I'm not that too proud. I remember they had a government shutdown. It was a long time. Geez, I forgot, like 5 weeks.
Yeah.
And we weren't impacted. I'm an attorney at the Board of Veterans Appeals. They still had money. But I got some Uber rides, and I could tell these were government employees, and some I would talk to. Like, you could just tell. One guy picked me up a very nice car, nicely dressed, and he was like a GS15 driving Uber. So you do what you can, and
Yeah.
it's that's life. And I think that we're all in the same. I guess the one good thing, and I don't know if it's a good thing, but it seems like the entire federal workforce, we're all in the same boat. We have company. And I was meeting with 2 senior executives who left. They kind of got pushed out. And one of them said he was going to work for Lowe's, like the Home Depot. And he's like, no, I'm serious. I really am. And I can kind of see that. He likes woodworking and things like that. And the other guy I felt bad for because his wife was a research professor at a university and lost her funding because of the Department of Education. So they went from 2 incomes to no incomes. And these were senior executives that, we're in the union, we've battled. But, at the end, when I met with them, I thanked them. And I said, you should look back on your career and feel good. They did a lot of their careers. They did a lot of good things. And that's really too bad.
And Doug, and maybe we can end on this. Taking pride in what you do every day,
Mm-hmm.
and saying to yourself, "Look what I did for this person or this group of people." And knowing that even if you didn't accomplish the end task for this person, that you moved things forward for them. And so the work that you guys do at the VA. And not just at the VA, all across the federal government, the work is so important. You make sure that things are happening for citizens of the country, right? And we're all a part of the same country, right? And we're all in a position to help each other. And it's important that we recognize when we've done something good for somebody, even if we've never met them, right? Pat yourself on the back and really take pride in that. Even when you see in the news, right, people are telling you, don't take pride in that. You're this, you're that.
Yeah.
You're not. You get to define who you are. You get to define the contribution that you make every day.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's an important part of keeping ourselves going on a daily basis, is really recognizing the contribution that we make, and even recognizing for our coworkers, right? Hey, nice job on this, or tell me something you did good today for somebody, and trading that with your colleagues, right? You tell me something and I'll tell you something, and patting each other on the back.
You're right. That's so important to recognize people and to understand that, you have a colleague, you have a boss, you don't know what's going on in their life. They could have somebody in their family with a diagnosis. Everybody has some cross to bear in life. Nobody escapes that. Doesn't matter how wealthy you are, your position. Life is difficult. Life is hard. Life is a lot of suffering. And so it's we're very grateful to have you here, by the way, Wright. And I didn't put your contact information. I know, I'm sure you're inundated now. I'm sure with people reaching out. And but if we'd like to have you back sometime and to do another talk, and we appreciate you.
Doug, thank you so much. It was really an honor to be asked, and I appreciate being able to be here today. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks, Wright. Take
All right.
care.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
you too.
Well, everybody, thank you so much. Some of these podcasts, we get these ideas actually from some of you. So, we always monitor our email. We always, people text me, they call me up. And if there's a topic you would like addressed in a podcast, please let us know. We're trying, there's a lot of information we want to get out there because there's a lot of things happening. And I know the big ones are the reduction in force with attorney BB Roberts. We're actually going to do another one of those in another 3 weeks with attorney Peter Broida. And, for those of you who don't know labor law, not many people do, he's kind of like the guru of labor law. BB Roberts is another guru. So we're incredibly grateful and honored to have this kind of talent. And a lot of it's because we live in the Washington, D.C. area, and also because of AFGE. So anyways, thanks for tuning in, and we will talk to you sometime soon. Take care. Bye-bye.